Let's look at the game, Fischer versus Larsen, 1958, Porte Rouge. Now, you'll remember from the first video that I'm studying the games of Bobby Fischer in order to get better at chess. The collection of games that I'm studying specifically come from Bobby Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games. And of course, it's not just his games, but it's also his comments and his thinking. USCF 1650. Will the games of Bobby Fischer and his notes help me get better at chess? We'll see. You might also remember that I'm studying the games to the point of memorization, or as I like to say, I'm memorizing the games as a way of gaining understanding. So this video will be me playing through the game from memory. Well, let's get into it. So Fischer is white, Larsen is black. If Fischer's playing the white pieces, then you can bet he's playing e4. By the way, Bobby is about 15 years old here in 1958. He was born in 1943. Larsen is about 8 years older, so around 23 years old. What's Larsen going to play here? He's going to play c5. By the way, I'll mention also about the games in this book. 20 out of the 60 are Sicilian defenses. 10 are Ruy Lopez's. So 50% of the games are either a Sicilian or a Ruy. That's pretty interesting. Okay, Bobby follows up with knight f3. We expected that. Now, what's Larsen going to play here? You'll remember in the first game that James T. Sherwin played the French Sicilian e6. Larsen's not going to do that. He plays d6. So Bobby plays d4, c takes d, knight takes d, knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn, which Bobby defends with knight c3. Well, now we come to a crossroads. What's Larsen going to play? Will it be a6, a Najdorf? Will it be e6, a Sveshnikov? Or will it be d6, g6, the dragon? Well, hold on to your hats. It's g6, the dragon. So you know this is going to be an exciting game. Bobby follows up with bishop e3. Of course, the bishop can go to e3 and doesn't fear being attacked by the knight moving on to g4, because then in that case, Bobby would play the bishop to b5 and there would be some pain for black. So the bishop comes up here to g7, and now the g4 square does have to be defended, so Bobby plays f3. Larsen castles. Bobby forms a queen and bishop battery, queen to d2. The knight comes out to c6, bishop comes out to c4. Knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and now bishop to e6. This is a surprising move to me, and it's one that I'm planning on playing in my blitz games if this position ever occurs. Bobby pulls his bishop back to b3. All right, now what? Well, perhaps we should say enter the dragon. I don't know if the queen is considered the dragon or not, but queen to a5. Bobby goes ahead and castles. And now Larsen is the first to launch an attack. b5. Well, I guess Bobby just shrugged because he plays king to b1. And now comes the pawn onto b4, attacking that knight. It lands here on d5. And here we are a little bit at the crossroads. One might ask the question, well, how should the knight be recaptured? Should it be bishop takes d5 or should it be knight takes d5? Fischer points out in his notes that bishop takes d5 is the better move, and he comments that about, I don't know, some years earlier, maybe it was around 8 years earlier, Korchnoi had played knight takes d5, and that it didn't end up very well. It was a difficult position to play, and the reason being because white snaps off the g7 bishop. So bishop takes d5 is the better move. And now Bobby has a choice. Should he play bishop takes d5, or should he play pawn takes d5? And he's going to play bishop takes d5. But he comments that about a year later, in a game, Tall versus Larsen, the same Larsen, will actually play e takes d5 and then stop the kingside attack and move his rook, the h rook, onto e1 and begin an attack down the center. So a little bit different of a strategy, and Bobby thought it was probably the stronger move. Nevertheless, in this game, bishop takes d5. Now you'll notice that this bishop is attacking the rook on a8, but there's a question here. Should black simply move the rook, perhaps to c8, out of harm's way, or should black take the bishop with the knight? Bobby thinks the better move, take the bishop with the knight. After the game, Larsen would comment that he played rook to c8 because he didn't want to go down any lines that were drawish. He wanted to play for a win. For his part, Bobby in the comments says, this move, rook to c8, is the losing move. Bobby brings the bishop back to b3. The reason is because this bishop on b3 is so powerful that Larsen really should have taken it off the board. After all, you don't want to give Bobby two bishops. All right, now what? Well, Larsen wants to double his rooks. So rook to c7. This, I suppose, provides a convenient excuse for Bobby to launch an attack. Well, here he goes, h4. Now, I want you to notice something, that in the next 14 moves, Bobby is going to play 10 pawn moves. It's quite something to watch. Larsen brings the queen over to b5, obviously making room for his a7 pawn, and Bobby continues to push. Larsen brings over the rook now to c8, doubled and ready to go. Bobby takes. Pawn takes by Larsen. Bobby launches another pawn, g4. And now Larsen launches a pawn. This is the pawn storm that happens in the Dragon, both sides throwing their pawns down the board. g5, and now knight to h5. Fischer comments that there were others who said perhaps knight e8 is better here, but Bobby demonstrates that in fact it's no better at all. And here Bobby, or maybe a move or so earlier, he said, I knew I was going to win this game if I didn't botch it, because I'd played dozens of Skittles games in analogous positions, and it was just a matter of prying open the H file and sack, mate. Well, here we go. Sack with a sack. And then the pawn takes, of course. Bobby pushes another pawn move. Of course, this pawn on f7 is pinned and cannot recapture. What is Larsen supposed to do here? Well, he plays e5, and Fischer says that this is a desperate attempt at freedom. It's not going to work. Another pawn move by Bobby. G takes f7 with check. Of course, the rook doesn't want to come over here and capture the pawn because it will be recaptured by the bishop. So the king moves over. Now Bobby does pull the bishop back, and Larsen pushes his pawn, attempting to block this a2 to g8 diagonal. Another pawn move Bobby captures with his pawn. The rook comes over, captures on f7, and now a pawn push to d6 and a discovered attack upon the rook. The rook comes up here to f6, but this gives Bobby a chance to attack it. Not only is Bobby attacking the rook on f6, but the bishop is also potentially eyeing the d8 square. Well, Larsen realizes that he's going to have to give back the exchange. He plays the queen to b7, and now Bobby takes the rook, bishop recaptures. And now another pawn move, attacking the rook on c8. The rook has nothing to do but move out of the way and move to d8, attempting to stop the pawn. Now, Bobby's going to make a move, and he's going to comment that it's the wrong move. There is, in fact, a mate in 3 on the board. Bobby doesn't play it, and so he admits in the notes that he makes an error here. What does Bobby play? He plays queen to d6, and Larsen resigns. What I like to do is to draw some arrows here just to emphasize the total control that Bobby has over the chessboard. It is quite amazing. Nevertheless, not the best move, queen to d6. There's a mate in 3. I'll leave you to find it. All right, this has been Game 2, Fischer versus Larsen, 1958 Port Rouge. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of this content, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks very much, and we'll see you later.